All right, welcome back. Today we're diving into a pathogen that is a true shapeshifter in the world of microbiology. This isn't just an organism that infects, it's one that actively builds its own defenses inside the human body. We are going from the lab bench straight to the patient's bedside to really understand the formidable uropathogen, Proteus mirabilis. The name itself tells you a lot. The genus, Proteus, is named after a Greek sea god who could change his shape at will, usually to avoid being captured. And honestly, that name couldn't be more perfect, because as you're about to see, this organism is an absolute master of transformation. It adapts its form, its function, all to colonize, infect, and literally build a fortress for itself inside the body. Just a quick heads up, all the information we're covering today is pulled from a detailed review we put together using Gemini Deep Search. So if you want to geek out on the primary literature and get all the citations, just check out the linked notebook document. Okay, let's get right into it. What exactly is Proteus mirabilis, and why does it get so much attention from clinicians and microbiologists? So what are we looking at here? At its core, Proteus mirabilis is a gram-negative rod, part of the Morganellidaceae family. Now, it's a totally normal resident of the human gut, but it becomes a major problem when it gets into the urinary tract. It's a master opportunist and a leading cause of what we call complicated UTIs, especially in patients with long-term catheters. And what makes it so good at causing trouble? Well, it really comes down to two killer features. First, it produces a ridiculously powerful enzyme called urease. This is the engine that drives kidney stone formation and clogs up catheters. Second, it has this incredible ability called swarming motility, which lets it just race up the urinary tract. These are not just interesting lab facts. These are its primary weapons. Okay, so let's move over to the lab bench and see how these unique characteristics actually help us identify it. Under the microscope, it looks like your classic gram-negative rod. But this is where that whole shape-shifting thing really comes into play. You see, in a liquid, like broth or even urine, it's a short little swimmer cell. But the moment it senses a solid surface, it completely transforms. And while the classics are great, modern diagnostics are really changing the game. With real-time PCR, we can get a super fast read on key genes, like the urease gene for its urease, or specific resistance markers. It just cuts down the turnaround time immensely. And for the really deep dive, whole genome sequencing is the ultimate tool. It's fantastic for outbreak investigations, letting us track how resistance is spreading with unbelievable precision. But of course, you can't beat classic culture. This is where you really see its personality. On a blood agar plate, it does its famous swarming act, spreading out in a thin film that can cover the entire plate in no time. Now, this is a huge headache in the lab if you have a mixed culture, because it'll just grow over everything else. Luckily, on McConkey agar, the bile salts stop it from swarming, so we can see its nice, pale, non-lactose fermenting colonies. Oh, and yes, there's the smell. It has a very distinct fishy odor that you won't forget. Now, this is how we tell it apart from its close cousin, Proteus vulgaris. They both have that rapid urease activity, but the two key tests are right here. Proteus mirabilis is indole-negative and ornithine decarboxylase positive. And getting this right is absolutely vital because their antibiotic susceptibility patterns can be quite different. So we've seen it on the bench. Now let's connect the dots. How do these lab features actually translate into disease in a patient? Think of it like a four-step invasion plan. First, it uses that incredible swarming motility to ascend the urinary tract. It literally swims against the flow of urine. Step 2, it uses these specialized little arms called fimbriae to latch on tight to host cells or a catheter. Then comes the pivotal move. It modifies the environment. That powerful urease enzyme breaks down urea, releasing ammonia, which makes the urine alkaline. And that lets it do step 4, fortify its position. The alkaline urine causes minerals to fall out of solution, creating rock-hard crystalline biofilms and stones. So this aggressive strategy makes Proteus mirabilis a specialist in creating infections that are incredibly difficult to treat. It's a huge player in complicated UTIs, and it's found in up to 45%. Think about that, nearly half of all catheter-associated UTIs. It is the #1 cause of infection-induced struvite stones, those massive staghorn calculi that can literally fill up the entire kidney. And if it breaks out into the bloodstream, you're looking at life-threatening bacteremia and sepsis. And this is where things get really tough. We have to talk about what is probably the biggest challenge with Proteus mirabilis. It's complex and frankly scary, antimicrobial resistance. Right out of the box, Proteus mirabilis is naturally resistant to a bunch of drugs. It shrugs off polymyxins like colistin, tetracyclines, and tigecycline. But the most critical one on this list, the one you absolutely have to remember, is nitrofurantoin. This is a huge clinical pearl. Why? Because nitrofurantoin is a go-to first-line drug for simple UTIs. Against Proteus mirabilis, it's completely useless from the start. This just underscores why accurate rapid ID is so important. And here is a major diagnostic trap that you need to be aware of. Proteus mirabilis is naturally a little bit resistant to the carbapenem antibiotic imipenem. Now, it's so easy to see that on a report and think, oh no, a carbapenemase. But it's not. It's just an intrinsic feature. Misinterpreting this can lead to escalating to bigger gun antibiotics when you don't need to, and it completely messes up our public health surveillance data. So careful interpretation here is absolutely critical. So on top of its built-in defenses, Proteus mirabilis is amazing at picking up new resistance genes. It loves to acquire ESBLs, which knock out many of our best cephalosporins. It can also grab plasmid-mediated AMP-C genes, but what's truly alarming is its ability to acquire carbapeneminases, genes like KPC, NDM, and OXA48. These enzymes destroy our last-line carbapenem antibiotics. This is why thorough susceptibility testing using breakpoints from sources like UCAST is non-negotiable for guiding therapy against these really tough bugs.
Okay, so given this wild mix of virulence and resistance, how do we actually go about treating and preventing these infections? Let's look at the guidelines.
You know, it's really interesting when you compare the different approaches. The Dutch swab guidelines, for example, tend to be very prescriptive. They give you specific drug regimens to start with and often lean towards longer treatment courses, like 10 to 14 days. On the other hand, international guidelines, like from the IDSA, push for a more tailored approach. They really stress looking at your own local resistance data, your antibiogram, and tailoring therapy based on risk, often suggesting shorter courses if the patient is getting better, which is great for antibiotic stewardship. So if we look at those Dutch swab guidelines in practice, here's a snapshot of the standard IV dosing for adults with a complicated UTI. You've got your workhorses here: cefuroxime, ceftriaxone, gentamicin, and ciprofloxacin. This is a great practical reference for the cornerstones of empiric therapy in that setting. Now, when we're treating kids, the playbook is a little different. Dosing is all based on weight, as you can see here for some common oral and IV options. The big takeaway for pediatrics is the heavy reliance on cephalosporins and amoxicillin clavulonate. You'll notice fluoroquinolones are missing, and that's because we generally try to avoid them in children due to potential side effects on their growing cartilage. But at the end of the day, the best treatment is always prevention. And for Proteus mirabilis, it all comes down to fundamental infection control. Of course, hand hygiene and cleaning the environment are huge, but the single most effective strategy, the real game changer, is preventing catheter-associated UTIs in the first place. That means we have to ask, does this patient really need this catheter? And if they do, we need perfect aseptic technique, and we have to get it out the second it's not needed anymore. And for those multi-drug resistant bugs, contact precautions are a must. And that brings us to the big, lingering question. We're facing an organism that doesn't just infect, it actively engineers its environment to build a fortress for itself. As it continues to acquire resistance to our best antibiotics, how on earth are we going to manage a pathogen that literally builds its own defenses? So that's our deep dive on Proteus mirabilis. I hope you found this useful. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts and your own experiences with this incredible organism. So please, leave your insights in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, make sure to subscribe for more journeys into the world of microbiology. Thanks for watching.